What if I told you there was a family more powerful than the Rothschilds in half the world, and you've probably never heard their name? While Europe's banking dynasties were financing kings and wars, another family was quietly building an empire that stretched from the Middle East to China. They started as refugees with nothing. Within decades, they controlled the money flow of entire continents. Their business model was so effective that every modern corporation still uses it today. But here's the thing: history almost erased them completely. If you want to uncover the financial secrets buried in history, hit that subscribe button right now. I'm the monetary archaeologist, and I dig up the money stories they don't teach in school. Today, we're talking about the Sassoons, and trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why forgetting them was no accident. Let's start with a question. How does a family go from being hunted refugees to dining with queens in just one generation? The answer is simpler than you think and way more disturbing. The exile. Picture this. It's 1829, Baghdad. The air is thick with dust and danger. A man named David Sassoon is running for his life. Not because he committed a crime, not because he did anything wrong, but because in the world of empires, being wealthy and Jewish made you a target when the political winds shifted. David's family had been big deals for generations. They managed money for Ottoman governors, they controlled trade routes that connected Persia to the Mediterranean. They were the kind of people who made things happen behind closed doors. But when the governor who protected them fell from power, everything changed overnight. New rulers don't like old money. They see it as a threat. And in 1829, the new boss in Baghdad decided the Sassoons had to go. So David grabbed his family and ran. No gold, no army, no connections in whatever city would take them in. Just his brain, his business knowledge, and absolutely nothing to lose. He ended up in Bombay, modern-day Mumbai, a sweaty, crowded port city controlled by the British Empire. Now, most refugees would arrive broken, desperate, begging for scraps. Not David Sassoon. He saw what everyone else missed. The opportunity. Bombay in the 1830s was chaos. The British were expanding their grip on India. They needed cotton for their factories back in England. They needed goods to sell in China. They needed someone who understood how to move products across cultures, languages, and borders. David Sassoon understood all of it. See, he didn't just know business, he knew people. He spoke Hebrew, Arabic, Persian, and eventually English. He understood Indian merchants, British officers, Chinese traders, and Arab sailors. While everyone else was stuck in their own bubble, David was building bridges. He started small: cotton, textiles, yarn, basic stuff moving through the ports. But here's what made him different. He built a network. Most merchants worked alone or with their own ethnic group. David hired everyone: Jewish accountants, Indian traders, Arab ship captains. He created a business that ignored all the social barriers that kept everyone else divided. In a world built on walls, David Sassoon built doors. And that's when he saw the real opportunity. The one that would make him richer than he ever dreamed. The one that would also stain his legacy forever. Opium. Now, before you click away thinking this is just another story about drug dealers, let me explain what was really happening. The British Empire had a massive problem in the 1830s and 40s. They were obsessed with Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain. But China didn't want anything Britain made. So Britain was bleeding silver paying for Chinese goods. The solution? Get China hooked on something they'll pay anything for: opium. The British grew it in India, smuggled it into China, and used the profits to buy tea. It was a triangle trade built on addiction, and it made the empire rich. But here's the thing: the British East India Company couldn't do it alone. They needed local partners. People who understood the ports, the merchants, the routes. Enter David Sassoon. He didn't run opium dens. He didn't smuggle the drugs himself. He was smarter than that. He became the middleman. He financed the ships, insured the cargo, stored the product, handled the payments. He was the banker behind the merchant behind the empire. And business was very, very good. By the 1840s, David Sassoon & Co. was one of the most important trading firms in Asia. His ships flew the British flag, his warehouses were stocked with goods flowing to China.
His name meant reliability in a world of chaos. Was it moral? Absolutely not. Was it legal? Under British law, completely. And that's the uncomfortable truth about empire. The law protects whoever's making the empire rich. David Sassoon made the empire very rich. Now, here's where the story gets really interesting. Most people who make dirty money just spend it on mansions and parties. They live fast, die young, and leave nothing behind. Not the Sassoons. David took every dollar he made from opium and cotton and turned it into something permanent. He built factories, constructed ports, financed textile mills that employed thousands of workers in Bombay. He built synagogues that still stand today, hospitals that treated people for free, schools that educated kids who had no other chance. He wasn't just moving goods, he was building infrastructure. And when global events created chaos for everyone else, the Sassoons turned it into profit. The American Civil War in the 1860s? That cut off cotton supplies to Britain. Suddenly, Indian cotton became critical. And guess who controlled the Indian cotton trade? The Sassoons. When Chinese silver payments flooded the markets, they handled the currency exchange. Every disaster, every disruption, every moment of panic became their opportunity, because they had the network to respond faster than anyone else. But David knew something crucial. Family was the only thing you could really trust. So David did what all great empire builders do. He sent his sons across the world like chess pieces. One son to Hong Kong, another to Shanghai, another back to Baghdad, another to London. Each one opened a new branch of the family business. Each one became an ambassador of Sassoon capital. They weren't just traders, they were nation builders working for a nation that didn't exist, the nation of money. Wherever the British Empire expanded, the Sassoons were already there, financing the expansion. And when David Sassoon died in 1864, he left behind something most men only dream of, an empire that didn't need him to survive. His sons took over and made it even bigger. Elias David Sassoon expanded deep into China, opening massive operations in Shanghai and Hong Kong right as the ports were forced open by the Opium Wars. Think about that timing. Wars created by opium the Sassoons helped trade, opened markets where the Sassoons made even more money. It's almost poetic, in a dark, twisted way. Shanghai in the late 1800s was a wild city, half Chinese, half colonial, built on opium, silver, and foreign debt. Every Western power wanted a piece. The Sassoons didn't just take a piece, they bought the whole bakery. They built warehouses along the Bund, Shanghai's famous waterfront. They financed shipping companies, bought enormous chunks of real estate that would become some of the most valuable land on Earth. By the 1880s, people started calling them the Rothschilds of the East. Not because they were as powerful as the Rothschilds in Europe, but because they used the exact same playbook. Turn mobility into dominance. Move faster than governments. Build networks that cross borders. Make yourself indispensable. Meanwhile, back in Britain, another branch of the family was climbing a different kind of ladder. Albert Abdullah Sassoon, one of David's sons, moved to London and did something brilliant. He became respectable. He donated to British charities, hosted fancy parties, made friends with politicians and aristocrats. And in 1872, Queen Victoria knighted him. A refugee family from Baghdad was now part of the British elite. The empire had welcomed its servants into the palace. But let's be clear, the Sassoon fortune still rested on opium. By the time Britain won the Second Opium War in 1860, Chinese ports were flooded with the drug. Millions were addicted. Entire communities were destroyed. And Sassoon ships were carrying it by the ton. It was legal under British law, but it was devastating under human reality. Here's the paradox of the Sassoon dynasty. They rose through brilliance, strategy, and courage, but they rose through a system designed to reward moral blindness. They didn't invent the opium trade, they just perfected it. They were the invisible hand of empire, efficient, loyal, and indispensable. Their money built hospitals and railways. It also built fortunes on addiction and suffering. Both things are true, and history doesn't let you pick one. As the 19th century turned into the 20th, the world started changing fast. Opium was falling out of favor, not because it was wrong, but because it was bad for business. China was starting to resist. International pressure was building. So the Sassoons evolved. They shifted from trade to finance, from merchants to bankers.
From selling goods to managing money. By the 1900s, they controlled banks, real estate, and investment houses across Asia and Europe. In Shanghai, they built the Sassoon House in 1929, a gorgeous Art Deco skyscraper on the Bund. Today, it's called the Peace Hotel, and it's still one of the most iconic buildings in the city. In India, they owned textile mills, shipping companies, and construction firms. In London, they were investors, philanthropists, and socialites. They had become legitimate, untouchable, respectable. But empires don't last forever, and neither do dynasties. The fall. The 20th century was not kind to old money. First came World War I, which shattered global trade routes. Then came the Great Depression in 1929, which destroyed markets worldwide. The Sassoons survived both, barely. They pivoted, adapted, invested in new industries. But something deeper was happening. The age of family dynasties was ending. The age of corporations was beginning. What once required family trust and personal networks could now be handled by boards, banks, and bureaucracies. The Sassoon Empire, built on loyalty and lineage, was losing its edge. Then came the real death blow. In the 1930s and 40s, the world the Sassoons built started collapsing. China fell into civil war. The Japanese invaded. The British Empire began its slow decline. India moved toward independence, and World War II tore apart everything. By 1949, when the communists took over China, the Sassoon assets in Shanghai were seized. Their property, their businesses, their legacy, gone overnight. In India, nationalization took their mills and factories. In Britain, their firms were absorbed into larger financial institutions. The family scattered. Some stayed in banking, some became philanthropists, but the dynasty, as a unified force, was over. By the 1970s, the Sassoon name had faded into obscurity. The Rothschilds of the East became a footnote in history books most people never read. The legacy. So why does this story matter? Because the Sassoons didn't just build wealth, they built a template. They proved that money doesn't need a country, just a network. They showed that in a global system, loyalty to profit can outlast loyalty to any nation. They perfected a model that every modern corporation uses today. Amazon doesn't conquer territory, it conquers markets. Apple doesn't enforce loyalty with armies, it does it through ecosystems. BlackRock doesn't rule countries, it rules capital flows. These companies operate exactly like the Sassoons did 2 centuries ago. They move faster than governments. They cross borders without friction. They turn instability into profit. They make themselves indispensable, and then they rewrite the rules. The Sassoons were the first global corporation disguised as a family. And their rise teaches us something crucial about power. It's not about controlling land. It's about controlling flow. The flow of goods, the flow of money, the flow of information. Control the flow, and you control everything. The warning. But the Sassoon story also carries a warning. Empires built on imbalance always collapse eventually. The Sassoons rose because they understood risk. They fell because they mistook stability for permanence. They thought their network was unbreakable, that their wealth made them immune. But when the systems that made them powerful started crumbling, they had no backup plan. The same forces that lifted them up, globalization, political instability, Technological change eventually buried them. And here's the scary part. We're watching the same thing happen right now. Modern corporations are more powerful than most countries. They operate with almost zero accountability. They profit from the same imbalances the Sassoons exploited. Cheap labor here, expensive markets there, governments too weak to regulate them. But the cracks are showing. Supply chains are breaking. Currencies are unstable. Nations are pushing back. The global system that made these giants is becoming too fragile to hold them. History doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme. The Sassoons proved that exile can become empire, that faith can become finance, that wealth can outlive nations. But they also proved that no dynasty lasts forever, only the structures they leave behind. You can still see those structures today. Walk along the Bund in Shanghai and you'll see the buildings the Sassoons built. Visit Mumbai and you'll find their textile mills, their synagogues, their schools. Look at London's financial district and you'll see institutions they helped create. Their fingerprints are everywhere, invisible but permanent. The Sassoons are forgotten, but their world isn't. We live in it every day. Because what they discovered, and what modern empires are still learning, is this. When money becomes the only passport, and profit becomes the only principle, history doesn't remember your brilliance. It remembers your consequences. Every empire built on imbalance eventually pays its debt.
And the ledger of history always comes due. If this changed how you see the modern world, subscribe to Monetary Archaeologist. I dig up the financial secrets that explain today. Because history doesn't just repeat, it echoes. And if you listen closely, you can hear the future in the past. See you in the next excavation.